Well, they will come in with a design like this. We had a great discussion on this one. I mean, this is a simple design. We have a conversation about, do you really want it like that, or should we put some more flair into it? And it just evolves like that. They know what they want, basically. And if you think something's going to look a bit funny or won't quite work, or you just explain. Well, this one is for an actor called Robert Bannister, who's playing Vincentio, the Duke. And this is his mantra when he leaves the city and goes in for a disguise. So I'm just cutting this out for him now, and then a maker will make it up for a fitting.
Once the fittings are agreed, the two experienced teams of makers take the material prepared by the cutters and stitch the costumes together. Compared to the men's department, the ladies' wardrobe produces very different shapes and uses other specialist skills.
Well, quite often what happens is we'll have a good talk with a designer so that we can get an idea of what he wants, and we'll go through any bits of information that he's got from various books, or, you know, sometimes it's a film. We'll get a film that they might have had inspiration from. The majority of us all have reference books which are very handy to refer to. Then I'll start making a pattern, and I will make a pattern from the stand, so I'll get a piece of calico. Quite often we won't make it in the calico for the person, but in this case for Claire, because it was quite a specific, she wanted to look like, sort of very nun-like, because she's going to be the bride of Christ, but she still wanted to look feminine, not too nun-like.
So the costumes help a great deal. I mean, she's a nun to begin with. She's a novice of the Poor St Clare's, which is quite a strict order. So the costume has been vital. What we're trying to do is find a costume that tells that story, and also tells the story of somebody who's actually quite attractive, and is, I mean, that is one of the causes of her being abused by authority.
Well, this is the hip pad to go underneath the petticoat to give her a better shape. And we had a fitting with just a thin pad, but it wasn't enough to kick out the back of the dress, so we've ended up putting a smaller pad on. But I'm just putting it on the stand now and putting the petticoat over the top to check the hem and everything, which is what we tend to do a lot, you know, putting on stands and making sure everything looks right, looks level. And basically, you know, once that's right, we can then start with a proper dress and things.
Sir, believe this. I had rather give my body than my soul.
Two nuns driving in a car, which is a really bad joke.
Tell it anyway.
And suddenly the devil comes down before them.
Right.
One nun sitting there terrified, and one nun says to the other, "What should we do? What should we do?" And the other one says, "Get out and show them your cross." And you get out and say, "I'm absolutely furious with you."
Theatre makeup is unlike ordinary makeup. It can be used to create dramatic effects.
Right, well, at this point in the play, my character, Pompey, has gone a little over the score by biting someone's finger off during the scene where he's arrested and sent to prison. So in response, in our production, he gets a rather brutal beating up. The director who decides how bad he wants you to look in this condition. And he went to Lavinia here and her boss and said, basically, I want him to have one eye almost closed with swelling and generally a very unhealthy state.
Yeah, he just tells us what he wants, and then we just want the actor to have a talk with them, how they can, you know, cope with something like this on their eyes. And really it's just a case of playing around, see how it fits.
And if it doesn't, she'll give me a real black eye.
Yeah. We make all the scabs ourselves.
The nice thing is that scab, as it were, has a journey through the play. That, you know, the next time you see him, obviously, it's meant to be a day later or something. So it's changed and it's kind of gradually got less.
Caliban, in Anthony Ward's design of The Tempest, has full body makeup.
And this is a barrier cream. It's called Skin, so it's like an extra layer. It's waterproof, and it's going to stay on for the next 4 or 5 hours. It just wears off as your skin flakes off.
So it's a very simple process of just slapping this grey muck all over myself every night, sort of head to foot with a loincloth. Go. To hide those bits that, you know, an audience doesn't want to see. But it's one of those makeups that take about, 20 minutes to put on and 4 days to get off.
And this is where it begins to look rather aboriginal, sort of finger painting.
What did you do today, Dad? Well...
As wicked to you as e'er my mother brushed.
Period detail is important from head to toe.
It's very important to have the right hat, the right proportion of hat, to actually balance the rest of the costume, because sometimes you'll see the costumes and they don't look finished without the hat. You know, once they put the hat on, you get a definite idea of the period and the style.
I think it's good, actually.
The hats are wired, the brim. Do you want the brim absolutely flat? We stretch a felt, which is soft, over a wooden block, and then we stiffen it and bind it, wire it, and then it ends up as a hat. It's a fairly typical priest hat, is this, and he gave us a design with the priest in his cassock and with this hat. And then at fittings it's decided how big it should be. So hats usually, through the process of fittings, change quite a lot because they want to put how they think the character would look, what sort of things that character would do in the hat, what sort of business they've got to do in a hat. And some of them just won't wear hats at all.
Deputy dog. Won't look nearly so silly on stage, I promise you.
Better not, Tom. Better not.
Well, Tina Gam is the nun in Measure for Measure. She has a simple black costume, and this shaped. It's a felt base with a veil and a white linen trim, and it's based on a reference that Tom gave us for a Russian nun, which we have here, and that was the reference we got. And then through the fitting, we get the right size and curves and things to fit and suit the actress.
Yeah, that'd be nice. The Spanish Tragedy is a play which ends in a bloodbath. Tom Piper's design came up with some special blood effects.
Well, the very first thing is I'm sitting there reading the play, making a note and thinking, oh my goodness, there's all these effects to cope with. You can imagine my reaction when I first read the Spanish Tragedy and got to the tongue cutting out bit. At the end, our 4 main protagonists all die dreadfully. And then we've got this really awful moment at the end where Peter White bites out his own tongue on stage.
We tried having a prosthetic tongue, but that just bounced. Bit like a rubber ball, so that was no good. So we ended up with I think it's an animal tongue.
We had the sample tongues, and he'd got calves' tongues, and they were enormous, which I hadn't expected. And when it came to it, it was the very tip, just the last 2 inches of the tongue, that looked vaguely like a human tongue. The worst bit of the operation was cutting off the 2/3 of the tongue that we didn't need and binning it, bearing in mind that most of my department, well, all of us, are vegetarians.
First, take my tongue, and afterwards my heart.
And then cuts his own throat. to achieve that, we tried a variety of different effects. What we eventually ended up in Stratford using was one of these tinting bottles, and then we took the tube off the colostomy kit, filled this with blood, and we found the blood had to be really runny in order to get it to travel all the way up the tube. And when we looked at the costume, really the only place that Peter could have the blood was quite low down towards his waist. And then we needed to find a way of holding the tube as it worked its way up his body, and then the really good bit is when the tube comes across his throat. Between the strips were little holes, so only a little pressure right down near his waist where nobody would notice it was enough for the blood to shoot up and spurt out of all the little holes, and then what was left of it would spurt out the end like an artery going. Another way to do this would be to take a dagger like this one, which has got a hollow handle, unscrew the end and fill it with blood. And then, when you need to cut someone, you just squeeze the handle and the blood comes out.
So with each person we looked at how they were going to die and where they were going to be stabbed and the best way for that blood to happen.
Because blood sort of breaks down into two areas. There's the blood where the actor is applying it to himself, which is obviously from his point of view the best and safest thing, and there's the one where somebody else is doing it to him, which is the most dangerous and the most tricky and has to be thought about.
The reality of it is that when somebody gets stabbed, they bleed.
There's loads of different ways of getting the blood onto the actor. In this show it was fairly easy. Most of them had one pocket with one blood bag in it. Siobhan Redmond, as Belle Imperia, had to stab herself to death, and all we could do was put a little tiny tube of liquid blood down her cleavage, which was fine, and she was able to activate it and blood to spurt up when she stabbed herself. But this isn't what Michael was after. He really wanted her to die in a pool of blood. So what she did was make sure she fell on exactly the same spot on the stage each night, where there was a hole, and underneath the stage were two prop guys with one of those huge gallon containers, a stirrup pump of very runny blood, which they then gradually pumped up so that the pool of blood oozed all around her. So at that end, it was absolutely covered.
Theatre requires a mix of skills and teamwork to create the world of the play.
Everybody is very single-minded and committed to the theatre.
Flexibility of people to achieve whatever's asked of them.
You get very involved with it, you put your heart and soul into it.
When it works, you know, regardless of how artistic it's been to actually do, that's when it's fulfilling.
It's great, there's so much backup and so much support.
I think that you have been part of creating something.